the way that you simplify mindfulness or put a perspective to mindlessness.
Yes, it's very different from meditation. Everybody wants to be happy, and you can't be happy if you're mindless. Lots of sweet things, people saying, be in the moment, an empty instruction, because when you're not there, you don't know you're not there. Let's take the mind and the body and put it together and see it as a single unit. I might say, you made me angry. No one is making you anything. The problem, and it's a big problem around the world, is that people don't realize that they're not noticing anything. So let's say you find now, after doing this for a week, that you're stressed when you're talking to Ellen Langer. Don't talk to me.
Probably she wouldn't care if we wouldn't be able to do the podcast because that's her mindset.
I answered a question you didn't ask me. I've never said this before publicly.
I'm Dr. Esra Çavuşoğlu, and I've been living a sober life for the past 20 years. My battle with addiction drove me to seek new methods, devices, and supplements to improve my physical and mental performance, enhance my quality of life, and ultimately live healthier for longer. From my experiences in addiction recovery, biohacking and longevity, to the latest global developments, from groundbreaking entrepreneurs to expert academics, the conversations I've had over the years are now featured weekly on Soberhead Podcast. Welcome to Soberhead Podcast. Today I'm joined by the legendary Dr. Ellen Langer, Harvard professor, pioneering researcher, and one of the most influential voices in the science of mindfulness. But this is not the kind of mindfulness conversation you may be expecting. Dr. Langer's work is not about sitting still, emptying the mind, or escaping thought. It's about waking the mind up. For more than 4 decades, she has studied how much of our lives we live on autopilot, accepting labels, diagnosis, age, habits, and even identity as if they're fixed facts. What if diagnosis is not the whole truth? What if craving is not constant? What if aging is not as fixed as we think? And what if changing the way we notice our lives could change the way our body responds? So today we talk about aging, health, addiction, chronic illness, stress, and the danger of believing too quickly in the stories we are told about ourselves. This conversation is about the psychology of possibility and how becoming more mindful may begin with simply noticing that nothing is as fixed as it seems. Let's dive in. Üniversiteyi sadece dersler, vizeler, finaller olarak düşünme. Asıl mesele okurken kendini keşfetmek, üretmek, projelerde yer almak ve mezun olmadan gerçek dünyayı tanımaya başlamak. Bir yandan psikolojiyle insanı daha iyi anlayabildiğin, beslenme ve sağlık bilimleriyle iyi yaşamanın ne demek olduğunu öğrendiğin, mühendislik ve yönetim bilişim sistemleriyle teknolojiyi, veriyi ve sistemi çözümleyebildiğin bir üniversite düşün. Yani sadece bilgi aldığın değil, düşündüğün, ürettiğin ve fikirlerini hayata geçirebildiğin bir yer. İstanbul Gedik Üniversitesi, öğrencilik hayatını gerçekten yaşarken geleceğini kurabileceğin bir deneyim sunuyor. Ayık Kafa'nın daimi destekçisi Gedik Eğitim Vakfı'nın sağladığı katkı ile size dünyanın önde gelen uzmanlarını konuk olarak getirmeye devam ediyoruz. Siz de Ayık Kafa'ya abone olarak destek verebilirsiniz. Dr. Ellen Langer, welcome to Soberhead Podcast. This is a thrilling moment for me. I'm so grateful that you accepted my invitation.
I'm happy to be here.
I really like how you approach. I listened to so many podcasts that you've been in. I read your books, and the way that you simplify mindfulness or put a perspective to a mindlessness really helps me and makes my life easier because I don't like very complicated mindfulness exercises and meditation. Just for me though, some other people may be benefiting from it. As I started, when most people, they picture meditation, sitting, breathing, stilling the mind, yours is almost the opposite. How do you define it?
It's so simple, it defies belief. All you need to do is actively notice new things. That's all. And when you're noticing new things, that puts you in the present, makes you sensitive to context. Your behavior becomes rule-guided rather than governed. Everything changes. As you actively notice, the neurons are firing, and 50 years of our research shows that's literally and figuratively enlivening. The problem, and it's a big problem around the world, is that people don't realize that they're not noticing anything. Virtually everybody, almost all the time, is no different from a robot. And the problem is when you're not there to know you're not there. So our parents, the media, teachers, we get this in school constantly, teach us absolutes. And when you know something is absolutely true, you don't pay any more attention to it because you think you know it. So let me tell you, I was a straight A student, right, all through my school career. All right, I go to this horse event, and this man says to me, will you watch my horse for me because I want to get my horse a hot dog? Hot dog, I say to myself, because I know as a straight A student, horses don't eat meat. He comes back with the hot dog, and the horse ate it. And that's when I realized everything I thought I know could be wrong, which for me was exciting because that opened up all sorts of possibilities. Almost all of our facts come from science. When you run an experiment, it only gives you probabilities, not absolutes. So if we ran a study with horses, we'd have to have particular kind of horses that haven't eaten for a particular amount of time, mix a particular amount of meat with a particular amount of grain, and then we'd see how many horses ate it. And we'd find most of the horses don't eat it. That's very different from horses don't eat meat. When you recognize that you don't know, and I think, Esther, the important thing for people to realize is everything is always changing. Everything looks different from different perspectives. So none of us know. Now, most of us know we don't know, but we think we're supposed to know. So we pretend, we tune out. Nobody knows. You can't know. And if you know you don't know and you don't have to know, you sit up and you notice. It's very, very simple. And yes, it's very different from meditation. As you said, meditation, you take yourself out of the world, you sit quietly for 20 minutes twice a day, repeating a mantra. Here, you're very much in the world. And, when you're having a good time, whenever you have to be mindful, you're present. What I've been trying to do for so many years, I've been writing books from the early mindfulness book to the most recent, The Mindful Body, trying to wake people up. You can't, if you ask yourself a simple question, I'll be quiet in a minute and let you speak. If you ask the question, can robots be happy? Do robots have any agency? The answer to both of those is no. So why would we choose to be a robot? And so when people, hopefully by the end of our time together this morning, people will be sure about how to be mindful in this other sense, which is, you can do it top down or bottom up. Top down is accept that we don't know anything for sure. And when you really know that, everything becomes new. The other is bottom up. So take things you think you know and notice 3 new things about them. And if you keep doing this and see, my gosh, I thought I knew that. I thought I knew Ezra. And now, if that were the case, if we were close friends, I'd see there were things that are different about you. And the more you do that, the more you see, gee, I'm not sure of anything, which is, again, a good thing when you recognize that nobody knows. If you think you're the only one who doesn't know, then you pretend and feel stupid.
While I was getting ready for the podcast, I did a lot of research. I always do. There was this question in my mind. What made you want to reorganize mindfulness at the very beginning of when you started?
No, I didn't reorganize it. It was very funny. I started studying mindlessness because there were several things that happened where I said, that's ridiculous. A simple thing like I walk into a mannequin and I say, I'm sorry. When I'm calling and I'm talking to a machine and my spouse says, be polite. I'm talking to a machine. It shouldn't matter, but I guess it's always good to be polite. Anyway, so I noticed all the mindlessness that was around. Then this funny thing happened. And I'm happy I don't remember who the person was. But somebody said to me, nasty, you are what you study. So I decided if that's true, I'll turn it around. I'll study the other side. I'll study mindfulness. So that was being there. Now, you have lots of sweet things, people saying, be in the moment, but it's an empty construct, an empty instruction, because when you're not there, you don't know you're not there. And the way to be there is just this simple noticing. And, so then I learned all about Eastern notions of mindfulness and Buddhism and so on. And I was actually pleased that there were so many similarities in the consequences of mindfulness as I study it, which was just turning mindfulness mindfulness upside down and meditation. So this is derived from a Western scientific perspective.
Can you share the similarities for people that would probably, they're going to be criticism from mindful teachers when they watch this podcast?
I'm not validating what the meditation literature says, just using their results. But, when you meditate, you're going to be healthier. They presume you're going to be happier. You're going to be less judgmental. And all of those follow directly from being mindful. Part of the reason I started studying this and studying what is a main point of the Mindful Body, the most recent book, is that I guess it was back in the 70s, I did a study where we went into nursing homes and we gave elderly people choices to make. That was all, choices and a plan to take care of. And the results were astonishing. Initially, what happened is they were happier and more alert, and that was nice. But we went back 18 months later and found that those people for whom we gave these choices and this agency over the plan actually live longer.
Wow.
And so for me, that was, well, how do you get from a thought to the body changing? And so I have 50 years of research exploring that question. So the health effects, we have several studies where we take older populations, we teach them to be mindful, and again, they live longer. We validated that in 4 different experiments. And even if that weren't the case, if you recognize you can't be happy, everybody wants to be happy. And you can't be happy if you're mindless. If you're mindless, you're just a robot. You're doing things that made sense yesterday that might not make sense today. So our research clearly shows that mindfulness leads you to be less stressed, to be happier, to be more engaged. Interestingly, when you're mindful, other people find you more attractive, see you as more charismatic, more authentic. Not only that, but we have lots of research with the products you produce when you're mindful bear the imprint of your mindfulness. They're better. So you feel better, you are more attractive to other people, and what you do is better. It's a win-win-win.
I have my producer, and I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a psychologist. I wear many hats, and in life things happen. Like I was going to do a conference, and then the war started in Iran, and then some of the American doctors didn't want to come, and then so on and so forth. Like there's a lot of things. Life happens. So one day we were on the phone. He goes like, "Listen, everything has a reason. Probably there's a reason why it happened. So don't get stuck on that idea that, oh, it didn't happen. And after a couple of repetition of his giving me a lecture almost, it kind of shifted my thinking. And funny enough, since then, anything happens, I'm like, all right, whatever. It's so much easier. Let me jump in for a very quick second. If you can hear me right now, we know you're watching Soberhead. But are you subscribed? Could you check it for me? Very honestly, our subscriber count gives us real leverage when it comes to convincing the guests we invite to join the show. So, if you want to keep watching some of the best experts in their field right here, please subscribe to the channel.
Yeah, well, the whole world is stressed. And people seem to think that stress is natural. You can't not be stressed. Well, my life consists of very little stress, although you can't live the number of years I've lived without big things happening. And I think that the thing that people don't understand is that events don't cause stress. So when those conductors couldn't come, that wasn't causing your stress. What was causing your stress was the way you were talking to yourself about it. And sort of, oh my God, if they don't come, you're going to be a failure. People are going to yell at you. You're going to lose your position, so on and so forth. All right. When we see that events don't cause stress, that it's ideas, our views of events that cause stress, and we're in control of the views. Now, when you add to that the understanding that there's no situation that doesn't lend itself to multiple interpretations. No matter, so, and let me say it a little differently, that when you think of outcomes, something is good or bad, that's also just in your head. All right. That things that are bad are also good. Things that are good are also bad. And when you start looking for different ways of understanding, the stress dissipates. So, I did research on this back in the 70s. We taught people who were about to undergo major surgery. So they're in the hospital. And that was back in the day when you stayed longer in the hospital. Now they get you out immediately. So I couldn't run the study today. And so I said to them, I taught them that it's your views that determine the stress. Everything that seems negative has another interpretation. And we go through the whole procedure. And then I say to them, okay, so let's say your surgeon says your surgery has to be postponed, which means you have to stay in the hospital for 2 more days. What does that mean to you? And the people who said, well, all right, it's not so terrible. I said, no, that's not what I was teaching. It's actually a good thing. So at that time, if I had, and I say to them, if I were in the hospital, that would mean I'd be saved from a million obligations. I'd be able to catch up on my reading or watch TV. I'd be on a diet because the hotel doesn't overfeed you, and I'd lose weight. So if I had to spend 2 more days there, that's 2 more days of relaxing and more weight loss. So it's a good thing, not a bad thing. And, so everybody thinks of these tragic things. And I describe one of these events that I went through in the mindful body. So many years ago, in the winter, I went to a friend's house for dinner. I come home and all my neighbors are outside because my house had gone up in smoke. Okay. Oh my God. Very scary. And the next day I called the insurance person. He comes and he said it was the first time, this is not bragging, maybe it is, but I'm really meaning it to share. And the first time in his 25 years on the job that the damage was worse than the coal. Most of the time, oh my God, he gets there and it's no big deal. Here, I didn't make it a big deal and he came and it was a big deal. But for me, I had already lost whatever went up in the fire. And everything there represented who I had been in the past, nothing in the present. And I wasn't going to send my sanity away after it. Now, the story gets better. So I move into the Charles Hotel because I don't have a place to live with my 2 little dogs. And this is Christmas Eve. I go out on Christmas Eve. I come back to my hotel room. The room is full of gifts. Not from the owners of the hotel, not from the management, but from the so-called little people, the people who park my car, the chambermaids, the waiters, waitresses, because I was a saint, there with 2 little dogs watching through the lobby every day. I tell you, Astra, it took me almost a year, at least 6 months, to be able to tell the story without it bringing tears to my eyes because it was so touching. Now, every single Christmas, I'm reminded of the basic goodness of people. And it brings calm and pleasant thoughts to me. And it's just lovely. That's many years. For 20 years, I've been appreciating that. And I don't remember anything I lost in the fire. So net, even the tragic often have an upside.
I'm listening to what you're explaining, and there are obviously different approaches to treat someone's grief, trauma, etc. More I listen to you, more I find resemblance how I take life. And I had a fire when I was in New York like a few years back. I had many things, but it doesn't. Maybe we're Turkish. Maybe we face a lot of crisis. That crisis doesn't mean much of anything. But when you compare me with someone else, I almost make them feel that either I don't feel what happened, or I'm dismissive, or I'm too resilient. There's so many ways of looking at it.
All of those suggest that a situation is absolutely bad. Mm-hmm. Situations are nothing. This is not a matter of denial. Denial is where it's bad, but you're going to make believe it's good. I'm saying at the very moment that it seems bad, there are also aspects to it that are quite good. If you focus on the bad, you're going to feel bad. If you focus on the good, you're not going to feel bad. It seems to me irrational when you have that choice to focus. An important thing that people don't understand is that we can't predict. You can't predict an individual event, an individual person's behavior. So let's take the stock market. Nobody knows if the stock market is going to go up or it's going to go down. There's no way of knowing. People have tried to know for forever, right? Now, the people who believe it's going to go down are scared. The people who believe it's going to go up are happy. While we're waiting to see if it goes up or down, it seems to me rational to not dwell on these negative things. Even a simple thing, I don't know why this comes to mind now. I was just writing again an op-ed about decision making. That if I say to you, do you want to meet my friend Joe? He's very impulsive. You're probably going to say, why the hell would I want to meet Joe? Right? But if I say to you, do you want to meet my friend Joe? He's very spontaneous. Yeah, I'd like to meet Joe. Okay, so impulsive and spontaneous are two ways of looking at the same thing in equal measure. Do you want to come to really know Ellen Langer? She's very gullible, which I am. It's terrible. You say no. Ugh. Do you want to meet my friend Ellen Langer? She's very trusting. Yeah, that's kind of nice. Trusting and gullible are the same. Inconsistent and flexible. Okay, so the point is everything cuts in multiple ways, and it's up to us to decide how to understand it. Mm-hmm. And so, when we first got on, you said you had listened to some of the podcasts. And one of these podcasts, I was trying to explain this to people. And I said, okay, so let's say right now my internet goes out. All right. So, so what? So I'll go eat lunch.
I know that when you logged in early, and I was thinking in my head, probably she wouldn't care if we wouldn't be able to do the podcast because that's her mindset.
That's right. That's right. What happens is when we make a decision, we act as if that thing we decided, it was based on a lot of reasoning, is the only outcome we should hope for, and so on. And we forget that the reason we had to make the decision in the first place is what we didn't know. You have to have uncertainty. There's no decision.
It's interesting. In my case, like for the fire, it was 2021, January. I got my American passport. The next day, I had a fire in my apartment. And I was like, and I had a good insurance. So they moved me into a new place. At that moment, yes, it felt bad. It was like, a little scary. But it turned out into such a great outcome that I decided to move back to Turkey. And then I had a totally new, much better life suddenly here.
One of the recommendations I make, which might seem strange to people, is to learn how to fall up.
Fall up.
Not fall down. Fall up. So let's say somebody bangs my car. Okay, so that seems bad. If I get that bang fixed and something else on the car fixed at the same time, then at the end of this, I'm in a better place than I was before. All right. So, so you can decide, mistakenly think that whatever the loss is, you can't live without it. You'll never have it again. All of these are predictions. And as I said, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. All we know is that when we're dealing with something, we have a choice of how we want to deal with it. People act, it's like in an interpersonal situation, I might say, you made me angry. No one is making you anything, and if you understand that person's behavior from their perspective, at that moment, you're not going to be angry. If you say, if a 2-year-old did whatever this person that you're angry at did, how would you react? You wouldn't be happy about it, but you wouldn't go off the deep end either. So the whole point of all of this is that our emotions are choices. The way we feel is a function of the way we see the world. The world comes in many shades, it's changing constantly, and we can choose a way of viewing things that leads us to feel good and be productive, or to give up. And you and I have both had Yeah.
I'm sober 20 years. So in 12 step, they teach you something wonderful. If even everything goes really, really, really bad, you did one thing right, you're sober. So it always lifts you up. It always makes you feel good. So I can relate how you explain things because I have that framework woven in me now. But how can someone who are listening to us can say, okay, I really like how they're approaching life. They're like really taking things from a much easier angle. How can they come to this point? What they should do? Because it's not that easy what we're sharing now.
The first thing is the next time you're stressed, if you review the last 3 times you were stressed and say, did the event even happen? And chances are it didn't happen. And think about you were stressed, and then what happened after it, and you got through it. And in your case, in my case with the fires, you're in a better place afterwards. All right. So stress requires 2 things. It requires a belief that something's going to happen. And I said we can't predict. And 2, that when it happens, it's going to be awful. So the next time you're stressed, ask yourself, give yourself 3, 5 reasons why it might not happen. So you went thinking it's definitely going to happen. Yeah, maybe it won't happen and you feel better. Then is the harder part, but the more important part. Let's assume it does happen. What are the advantages of this? And there are always advantages, but they're not going to do their work if we don't recognize them. So whenever you're upset about anything, step back and say, well, I'm choosing. It doesn't feel that way. You really made me angry. Okay. I'm choosing to feel this way. How can I feel differently? Well, how can I understand our feelings follow from our understandings. If you say, oh my God, the sky is falling, it would be irrational to feel good. But you need to provide the evidence that's meaningful to you to show that, well, right now the sky hasn't fallen. And we don't know what's going to happen. And in today's world, with wars all over the place, with this craziness that's happening in the United States, I mean, people are more stressed than they were 20 years ago, I think.
And smartphones, internet, AI.
Well, but no, and all of those are good examples of what I'm saying, that these are just tools. The internet, a smartphone, artificial intelligence, they're tools. And tools can be used for good or evil. You can have a baseball bat, and a baseball bat can be used to play the game of baseball. You can take the bat and go hit everybody over the head.
Would you like to share some of the studies that you made with the chambermaids, with the counterclockwise and stuff? Because it would really how the mindset is changing people's biomarkers and look and etc.
After I did those early studies, making people more mindful and they live longer, the question was, how do you get from this fuzzy thing called the thought to the body? And that's what's operating with mind-body dualism that everybody around the world, most people believe. You're not taught it. You don't know you believe it. But everything suggests people think the mind and body are 2 separate things. And so I said, well, let's take the mind and the body and put it together and see it as a single unit. And if it's a single unit, that means every thought is affecting the body. Every movement of the body is affecting our thoughts. It's one thing. And that idea of mind-body unity gives us enormous control over our health and well-being. The first study we did was a study that's called the Counterclockwise Study. We retrofitted a retreat to 20 years earlier, and we had elderly men live there as if they were their younger selves for 5 days. So we put their minds back in time. We had them talk about past events as if they were just unfolding. Everything was, as well as I could approximate a Hollywood scene 20 years earlier. As a result, their vision improved, their hearing improved, their strength, their memory, and they looked noticeably young. Quite remarkable. 5 days, no medical intervention. The next study I ran with Ali Crum, who was my student at the time and now professor at Stanford. What we did was ask chambermaids for how much exercise do you get. So they say they don't get any exercise. Well, these people are cleaning all day long, but they thought exercise is what you do after work. Now let's see what happens if we teach them, if we change their minds and teach them that their work is exercise. So we divide them into two groups, and for one of these groups, we teach them that their work is exercise. Making a bed is like working at this machine at the gym, so on. So now we have two groups. One group that knows their work is exercise. That's the only change. The other group no. We take lots of measures. How hard are they working? No difference between the two groups. How much are they eating? No difference. On any measure we could think of. Now the important thing. Mm-hmm. Those people who changed their minds, only their minds, to know that they were doing all of this exercise, lost weight. There was a change in waist to hip ratio, body mass index, and their blood pressure came down. I have, the mindful body is full of studies like this. Let me give you one of the more recent ones, but there are so many on all sorts of diseases. So this was done with my graduate student, Peter Ungle. What we did was we inflicted a wound, a minor wound, but a wound. And now people are divided into three groups, and individually, they're in front of a clock. For one of these groups, the clock is going half as fast as real time. For the second group, it's going twice as fast as real time. For the third group, it's real time. What we found was that wound healed based on clock time, perceived time. We have study with diabetics where we again have them with a clock that's rigged going twice as fast as real time, half as fast, or real time, and their blood sugar level follows perceived time. We have people who are in a sleep lab. They wake up and we've fudged the clock again. They think they got 2 hours more sleep, 2 hours fewer, the amount of sleep they got. And again, biological and cognitive functions follow.
I have to add something to that. Let me jump in for a very quick second. If you can hear me right now, we know you're watching Soberhead. But are you subscribed? Could you check it for me? Very honestly, our subscriber count gives us real leverage when it comes to convincing the guests we invite to join the show. So, if you want to keep watching some of the best experts in their field right here, please subscribe to the channel. I saw my mom yesterday and I was sharing that I was going to do an interview with you, and I shared about the sleep part, that very specific study that you guys did, because we as a family, we struggle with sleep forever. And she goes like, yeah, that's exactly right, because even the days that I sleep wonderfully, when I look to my Fitbit and it says like you slept less than the day before, she goes like, oh my God, I feel horrible. I didn't sleep well.
Yeah. I'm glad we have the validation from
Exactly. No, but you're absolutely right. That was interesting, though. Tell me about how do you feel and think about this work-life balance?
So work-life balance is certainly better than just work-life imbalance. But, most of the things that we come to in this culture in the world, for reasons I don't quite understand, it goes from bad to better, but not where it should be. To see work as work, what does it mean for it to be work? Then people don't like it, they're stressed. We did a study forever ago where what we did was have people do the exact same thing. But for one group, we called it work. For the other group, we called it play. The people who were in the work group hated it. Their minds wandered. They wanted to be paid a lot to do it. And the others had fun. And so I think that what we should have is not work-life balance. We should have work-life integration. Mm-hmm. That we should be the same people at work, at play. I think I couldn't imagine spending 40 hours a week hating what I was doing. Yeah. What people don't realize is that, again, if we do what we are doing mindfully, even in the smallest ways, we end up enjoying what we're doing. Another study that was kind of silly. Well, it's not silly. We had people given activities that everybody hates. So in one, or half of the people hate. We take the haters. People who hate women hate watching football. People who hate classical music. Several activities. And we have people just watch it, do it, whatever. The next group is told, notice one new thing about it. The next group noticed 3 new things about it. And the last group noticed 6 new things about it. The more they notice, the more they like the thing. We're brought up sort of waiting for something to pull us when we don't have to. We can go and grab anything. Or, if you're a woman and you don't like football, but you like, pardon, I don't know if I should be saying this, you like looking at men's rear ends, so look at the football players' rear ends, and that will get you engaged. Simply noticing makes you engaged. That engagement, the neurons are firing, and that's literally and figuratively enlivening.
So do you think that, let's say, for this life-work balance thing, are these things that we were taught that should be separate?
We're taught that work, everybody has to work. Well, if you think you have to do something, then you don't enjoy it. If you think you're being rewarded in doing it, then you want to do it. If you say to a child, after you finish your homework, you can go out and play, what's the implicit message? Since they know play is good, that means the homework is bad. And that's what we do with workers, throughout their adult life. And most people, I believe, who are successful at what they're doing, enjoy it. And when you enjoy it, you spend time with it. You don't race from it. You think about it even when you're not working because it's fun. So if I I write a lot of books. And if I wrote books seeing it as work and drudgery, and I set the clock, okay, from this hour to this hour, I have, it would be hard to do it. If I see it as a way of expressing myself, and all day long when I'm not writing, I'm having experiences that will eventually possibly find their way in my books. You enjoy what you're doing, or else you wouldn't do it. You said you wear many hats. If any one of those hats was, scrunching your head, you'd say, all right, I'm not going to do it. And the point is, even, your listeners might say, well, that's fine for you in the ivory tower. And Ezra, who's also a psychologist and a big shot. But for me, I'm a working class person. And, if you have one of those jobs where you think there's no way you can enjoy what you're doing, just look at your coworkers. Surely there's going to be somebody there who's having fun while they're doing it. And so let me tell you a little story that's going to seem unrelated, but to me it's very related. And I want to tell it anyway, whether it's related or not. Okay, so we just had graduation. So a couple of years ago, on graduation, I and my colleagues are on the stage in our robes and whatever, and we don't realize that we're trapped there now for the next, hour or two, because they're going to give out the graduate school degrees, naming each person. And each area in the university, there's so many of them, East Asian study is going to, oh my God, and everybody is complaining. And then I say, okay, let's make it a game. So they go, East Asian studies. I say there are 3 PhDs. My colleague says 5. The other one says 7. And now we can't wait to hear it, to find out if we're right. And we do this with each of these areas. And the time passed quickly because we made it fun. All right. No matter what we're doing, there's a way of doing it that makes it fun. And when it's fun, you're noticing more about it. Even if you're, people, when they're eating cereal, a bowl of cereal and you're eating it mindlessly, you shouldn't eat it mindlessly. Whatever the cereal is, each part of it is not the same as the other. That's kind of interesting. The milk doesn't hold to each part the same way. Why did you like the last bite and you don't like this bite as much? Are you better off having a full spoon? You just play with it. It becomes fun, which is very different from the idea, which is still better, that a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. Take this thing that's awful, add something to it that's fun. No, that's better than just seeing it. It could be awful, make it, do something to add to it, to take this awful and make it fun, or realize the awful itself is not awful. There's a way of understanding it that makes it interesting.
But don't you think that people need to go because some people can right away jump into how you describe life and they can maybe adjust themselves. Some people would have harder time for sure. They may need some therapy or like cognitive.
No, no, I don't think so because I think I've never said this before publicly, but I believe that most therapists are depressed. And so therapists are very good at telling people, yeah, I understand how you feel, because they really do. And that's why now that there's a new profession, which I had argued for before it existed, coaches. So now that you feel a little better, now you need someone to show you how to go out and live differently. All I'm suggesting to people is that they test it. Something upsets you, ask yourself how you might understand it differently. And the more you do that, the easier it becomes. Yeah, it's very hard to go from somebody who is a pessimist, who all their life, they're 40 years old, for all of their thinking lives, they've been a pessimist, to listen to one podcast, no matter how brilliant it may be, and then switch everything around. And then there are some people who when I used to do therapy, it was a short time, but I had this one client who we called a patient at the time, who seemed to she was wedded to the idea of she was miserable and couldn't get, it was her way of being. And I said, that's fine. If you enjoy being depressed, the only problem is calling it depression, But I agree with you. I'm not suggesting that people can flip so easily, although there are times you do. That hot dog experience for me, my whole life changed instantly with that one event. So people know what's persuasive to them. Some people need to start with the easy and see. Some people want to start with, you have this person you hate, and you're sure this person is a monster, and that bad things happen every time you have an okay, so take that person and understand from their perspective why they're doing what they're doing, or see how what they're doing isn't being done to you. This is something people might find interesting, that the bully, the monster, the people that upset us, nobody behaves that way out of a choice. Nobody who's their best self behaves that way. So when you recognize that this person who's pushing you around, you should feel sorry for them. And as soon as you feel sorry for them, the dynamic changes from you being one down to possibly one up. So in other words, you start screaming at me. Now, I could feel bad that you're screaming at me, or I can recognize that if you were a guru, if you had it all together, you would never scream at me. So why are you screaming at me is because you're having troubles. And so now, again, I feel sorry for you, or at least become less afraid of you.
Why do you think the therapeutic world adopted the traditional mindfulness rather than your mindfulness?
Well, for one thing, the traditional, it's Eastern, let's say Eastern versus mine, Western, because I started this the same time as John Kabat-Zinn, who was doing the mindfulness, stress reduction, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. That's a program, and a program takes some time, right? And if this is cynical, and I should take the time to find a nicer way of saying it, but just to be straightforward, if I'm charging you every time you see me, I want you to see me more often, right? If I gave you the answer, look, if I were in therapy with you and you're trying to teach me that everything is uncertain, and so we have a relationship, each week I come in and so on, how does that compare to I see the horse eat the hot dog, which is instant. I don't need you anymore. Mm-hmm. Now, but you add to that a whole different part of this, that, as you pointed out, not everybody allows themselves to be convinced quickly. Not only that, but people tend to think the degree of the suffering can only be fixed by an equal measure of something in reverse. that if you have cancer and I say to you, here are 3 words to repeat and your cancer will go away. No, this is so painful and so awful. It's impossible. So you're not going to even try the 3 words. And I'm not suggesting I have 3 words, but just to say we have those people who are open to test whatever comes their way that might be simple and see how it works. And we have other people who think big problems take a long time to cure. I just wrote a new book. I haven't sold it yet. It's being sold right now. That basically argues for something that I wrote about in the first book on mindfulness, which is that behavior makes sense from the actor's perspective, or else the actor wouldn't do it. And when you recognize that, then every time you come down on yourself for why did I do this, you have to now find a better explanation, because nobody wakes up in the morning and says, today I'm going to be miserable, nasty, obsequious, whatever we are. So what are you being? And if you go back to the original situation, you find there's always another explanation. And I said this to you before. So am I gullible? Well, I sure seem gullible, but nobody intends to be gullible. So what am I intending? What I'm intending is to be trusting, and I value being trusting. And we know why when we know why we're doing or have done what we did or are doing from our own perspective, our self-esteem changes and improves markedly and immediately. Now, when I know all these names that I've called you and all the ways you annoy me, if I do the same thing and say, well, from your perspective, what sense did that make? Then again, what happens is our relationship improves, but it changes the structure of so many things. You talked about AA, and I don't want to get into this, but I think AA starts off with, again, we have this person who drinks too much. Aren't they awful? Isn't that terrible? And I would say, well, why is the person drinking? Now, let me ask you something, Ezra, that if I told you that here's this person, Jane, who does X when she's anxious, and X makes her feel good, would you think that that's a rational or an irrational thing for her to do? I think it's rational. So now if we say she takes a drink, and if she knows that it's rational, it's easier to say, let's see if there are other things that you might do that wouldn't have the downside and the cost of all that drinking that might be positive.
I would like to maybe add one more thing that what AA says. AA says that actually drinking is normal for us. What we're doing by not drinking, it's abnormal. So we're fighting with...
Well, yes, except, see, but it's all mindless. The whole world is mindless. I'm not throwing stones. I mean, but it keeps me with enough content to keep writing book after book. So, as I said, we're doing this research with addictions. Let's take drinking. And it's very simple.
Let me jump in for a very quick second. If you can hear me right now, we know you're watching Soberhead. But are you subscribed? Could you check it for me? Very honestly, our subscriber count gives us real leverage when it comes to convincing the guests we invite to join the show. So, if you want to keep watching some of the best experts in their field right here, please subscribe to the channel.
Just have people keep a diary. And essentially, we want them to notice, let's say you have every 3 hours, they ask themselves, did I have a drink? Yes or no? Did I want to drink? Yes or no? And surely, at the end of the day, people are going to see they didn't want a drink and they didn't have a drink. They're going to see they didn't want a drink, but they had one anyway. They wanted one and they didn't have one. Right now, people who are told they are addicted believe they always want and they have no control over it. And that's nonsense. It's nonsense. All right. Surely there are times, that if right now, if you're enjoying our conversation, you're not sitting there longing for a drink. If you're bored with what I'm saying, then it's a problem with either me or how, or how you're understanding what I'm saying. So you would say, oh, during this hour, you didn't want to drink. So people can see they do have control. that you look at the end of the day to when you didn't want to drink and you didn't have one. Well, that's interesting. What's going on those times? Or you wanted one, but you didn't have one. So when you're indoors and you're not allowed to have one, you're not going crazy. You just accept it. I studied this, and in the mindfulness book, I talk a lot about this because you would have people who, not with drink, because you can drink on airplanes, but smoking. Mm-hmm. So they're heavy smokers. They get on the plane. You're not allowed to smoke. They don't smoke. Just, they're not sitting there going crazy. Now, even if the second they get off the plane, they light up. And let's say this is a long flight. It's a 15-hour flight. We would know if that person were suffering. And so we have two different mindsets. One is out of sight, out of mind. And the other is absence makes the heart grow fonder. And we switch from one to the other. And when you know you can't, you manage just fine. When you think maybe you can, that's when you do the absence makes the heart grow fonder. So if somebody you love is going to go away for a year, you're not going to go crazy for a year, right? You do the out of sight, out of mind. If they're going away for a weekend, then maybe you can do absence makes the heart grow fonder. Mm-hmm. We are in control of everything we experience emotionally, cognitively, physically. And we give up all of that control by buying into these absolutes that we have been taught, mind-body dualism, things are good or bad, people are good or bad, rather than all of us behave in ways that vary over time. And that person who is mistreating you probably isn't mistreating you all the time. So what's happening when they're not mistreating you? Those are the moments that we have control. And I developed a therapy for chronic illness based on this. That when people have a chronic illness, they tend to believe, well, first, chronic illness, people understand as there's nothing you can do about it. No, all it means is that the medical world doesn't have a solution for us. That's very different.
For the moment.
Now, that's right. So when you have a chronic illness, you think your symptoms are going to stay the same or get worse. Nothing stays the same. All right. There are always small changes. And so even the stock market that we were talking about, when the stock market goes up, it doesn't go up in a straight line. It goes up and it goes down a little. So it's more going up than down, or down than up, depending on what's happening. Same thing with our symptoms. So what we did was we called people at various times a day over the course of a week, sometimes 2 weeks, and simply asked them, how is the symptom now? And is it better or worse than the last time we spoke? And why? Several things happen when you do that. First, the person feels like they have some control over their illness themselves because they're doing the whole thing. Second, as soon as you experience, hey, this is a moment I don't feel as bad, that feels good. And third, most important, is that when you ask the why question, you engage in a mindful search for an explanation. That itself is good for your health. Fourth, you're more likely to find a solution if you're looking for one. Now, we did this with serious diseases, stroke, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, chronic pain, a host of disorders. And for each and every one of them, we get the symptoms diminishing significantly, sometimes completely. Right. And this was my antidote. I wanted to give people a placebo. Now, control over a placebo. So a placebo, it's our strongest medication. You take this pill that's nothing by definition. It's a sugar pill. You think it's something, and then you get better. So what's making you better? It's not the pill. You're making yourself better. So if you're making yourself better, isn't there a way of doing it without the whole charade? What do we need this pill that isn't doing anything? So I developed this. Now everybody, most people, and if not, they can borrow one, has a smartphone. You can set the smartphone to ring in intervals. So have it ring in 15 minutes. Ask yourself, how is my symptom now? Better or worse than before, and why? Then set it to ring in 2 hours, just random moments of time. And why? And when you do this, you're going to see, gee, right now I feel better. Why do I feel better? I feel better because I'm talking to Ezra. Ezra is doing the same thing. She feels worse. She's all of a sudden realizes when she's so anxious. How can she think she's anxious all the time? Nobody is stressed all the time. If you did this attention to variability, you'd see. So let's say you find now, after doing this for a week, 2 weeks, that you're stressed when you're talking to Ellen Langer. Don't talk to me. And then all of a sudden your stress goes away. Or find a way for us to talk differently so it's not stressful. The point is that by mindfully noticing the control we have over serious diseases, our health, our happiness, virtually everything that matters to us in life becomes palpable, something we can do for ourselves and help other people with.
Is that in your new book, The Mindful Body, Thinking, the new way to chronic health?
Our way to chronic health, yeah. It's about everything, all the mind-body studies, but more than that. Basically, it's how to be healthy and how to be happy without having to do anything extraordinary or pay large sums of money or do something that takes, a lot of time every day. It's just, all of a sudden, being awake. Sadly, Ezra, I find over 50 years of research that most people are sealed in unlived lives. And so I have been writing books, doing podcasts, radio, whatever, for my whole career to try to help break that seal. Why? I'm very lucky that I'm a happy person. And it's not a mindless happiness. And that's because I had parents that were very loving and supportive. And I see it's not a hard thing once you understand it. And so it feels like a moral obligation to share. I answered a question you didn't ask me. At the beginning, we shared about the word mindlessness. I often think when people ask you, how are you doing? Such a mindless question, because I always think like, what if I start sharing all my problems to the person who's asking me, suddenly a random person, how are you doing? Like getting into a restaurant. And I said, well, this happened, that happened. What they would lose their mind. Yes. And I'm not saying that if you ask me, how are you? That to be mindful, I have to go through my physiology at the moment, whatever thoughts are on my mind. But I can give you the same answer mindfully or like a robot. I can appreciate that what you're doing is being polite, making a connection. I can validate that connection by simply saying, fine, thank you, how are you? So the whole interaction is not really about how our physical being is. It's a way to make contact. You shared a little bit about how you're doing a study on addiction, but if you would like to help people who are struggling with, and you shared like put the alarm clock and stuff, do you have more things to be able to help them to, if they're going through cravings and stuff? The book is full of these things. So, and what is a craving? What does that actually mean? Give me an example and I'll give you a solution to it. So sometimes it's really fun, like at around 11:30 to start craving that, that sandwich you're going to eat. What's wrong with that? So the craving is not good if it's a piece of cake and you're a diabetic, perhaps. Sure. But craving stems from both mindless and mindless things. As I said before, when you actively notice things, they become more appealing. Because, for addicts, suddenly out of they connect the craving to something, like whatever is happening in their life. I just had a client that she was going through intense craving at a point to buy a drink because her grandfather died and she was in her mom's and father's house for a whole week. And everything started getting on her, in my opinion, and she was going through this craving. What people need to understand is that's what I was saying to you before, that it's rational. If forever You're in a situation that feels bad and you take a drink and you feel better. That's rational.
Mhm.
If you don't want to do that, all you need to do is say to yourself, one of two things, or both. First, how bad is it really? Because, typically reading from the past. In the past, being in this situation was unbearable. So now I need very little to see this as it's going to go in that same direction. So if you see how right now things are very different from the past, you need to come up with alternatives. So here, let's say if it's the person that you think the person is making you want to drink because they're so whatever, you can understand their behavior in very different ways. If you see me as impulsive, you're going to want to get away from me. If you see me as spontaneous, you're going to want to befriend me. It's all under our control. We just need to understand that we have multiple ways of understanding any situation, and each of those understandings will give rise to different emotions and behavior. If you see something as terrible, of course you want to get away. But that same moment, there are probably things about it that are even positive. And I think that people live out the same situation over and over and over again. And if you just said to yourself, well, you were 20 years old when you first started to understand things that way, don't you want now at 50 to see the ways it's different? And then look for the ways it's different. If you look for the ways it's the same, you're going to respond in the same way. If you notice the ways it's different, that'll help you behave differently.
I mean, I wish your books were in Turkish. I would love to connect your people with good publishers. I looked, I couldn't find, but I mean, I feel like, people really need to read your books in Turkey, because the reason that I do this podcast, we translate it into Turkish so people has more access to information, scientific new findings and etc. in the world. But, it's really much more applicable, in my opinion, much easier to understand. And, it's almost practice.
Let me ask you something. I think that, do you know if the book Mindfulness and the 25-year anniversary edition of Mindfulness, that may be in Turkish? That would be a good starting point. And eventually, I assume, since it's already out in many languages, that eventually it'll be out in Turkish as well.
Dr. Langer, thank you so much. I know that was, you were very busy for the last few years with your new books. You keep writing. I'm glad that I was able to chive in and at an hour with you. It was such an honor. Thank you so much for your time.
Well, it was my pleasure, Ezra. I wish you the best. Take care now.